Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. And today we'll be talking about progressive rendering and how to make your apps render sooner. And first, let me introduce myself a little bit, and maybe you find some interesting facts from here. I worked as a .NET developer for 3 years. Sorry for that, I was blind. And then I fell in love with Node.js because of its wonderful not blocking I/O. I really fell in love with that, especially from after the talk by Brian Dahl, who's a creator of Node. And then I worked as a lead developer at Flump, which is like really popular service in Russia, kind of like Yelp here. And as you might guess, I worked as a JavaScript developer already. And now I live in Berlin and work for Amazon, building UI components for Amazon Web Services, along with my great team, my cool colleagues. And you can find me online by this handle, which is Pragmator, on Twitter, GitHub, Medium, and maybe something else. Give it a try. And we are going to talk about server-side rendering. And I think it's very important to have server-side rendering today, even if you have single-page applications mostly on the internet. Sometimes we need server-side rendering for SEO, for crawlers, or maybe other reasons. And there is a good point how to improve this server-side rendering and make it more, feel more faster for our users. And for this, we would talk about typical server-side rendering today, all developers implement around the world, and why it's not that good for user experience, and how can we make it better. And let's start with the server-side rendering in general, like how typically people implement server-side rendering nowadays. So usually we use Express or Connect or something like that, and just implement middleware for that. And it's basically a function that takes HTTP request, HTTP response, and something like next callback if we don't want to serve a page, and just pass the control to another middleware. And in this case, we just parse some parameters from URL. Then we just query some data from the database, or maybe a RESTful API from somewhere, doesn't matter. Then we render a template for this data, and then just end HTTP response with HTML. So, who has ever implemented rendering like this? Raise your hands. Yeah. And you might be wondering, what's wrong with that? And actually, there are some things that are wrong. So if you have dynamic HTML document, dynamic page, we need to render the whole page in server's memory, in a buffer. And of course, to generate this page and to render the template, we need to go to the database for data, or maybe to RESTful API just somewhere. And potentially, it's a very slow operation. It might last for half a second, maybe more, it depends. And therefore, it's kind of risky because it depends on your load, on your network, on the infrastructure, on your hardware. A lot of factors can influence on that. And let's imagine that we have up to 10 requests for data, and each of them depends on a previous one. In this worst case, your users would not see anything for 5 seconds. And that's really scary. And let's ask our users, what do they think about that? So some of them are just sad, and they are crying, seeing how our app renders, but they wait. But some of them are very angry and might be even want to find us and kill us because we implemented this app. And some of our users are also developers, and might be they know that progressive rendering exists, and they're just saying that our app is crap. And how can we fix this? How can we make our application render sooner despite of this reasons we have like for requesting data and maybe other conditions we have in our app. Instead of sending the whole HTML buffer at once, like previous code does, we can use a simple idea. Instead of trying to serve this very heavy and slow page, like lifting up the stadium, we can just split this page in small pieces, in chunks, and send this HTML page as multiple chunks. And obviously, it looks more powerful, right? And easy. So, and this approach would be progressive rendering. This animation is trying to explain how that works. So on the left side, you have typical rendering implementation, which goes for data, building the page in memory, and then just gives the whole page serves from the server in the browser. And until this moment, nobody sees anything. I mean, our users, of course. And on the right, the app uses progressive rendering, which means it has less time to first byte, and you have something as soon as your first portion of data is ready on server. And this is really tricky because from the performance point of view, I mean from numbers point of view, it's kind of maybe even slower, but from the perception point of view, our users, they see that our app works for them and does something for them. And this perception is much better than seeing nothing for 5 seconds, even though maybe it's technically a little bit slower. And there was a talk at last JSConf Euro in Berlin where unfortunately, I can't remember the name, but it was a talk about perception of performance. And that was a very similar idea, that perception says us that we need to do something as soon as possible to show that our app works for our user, that we appreciate that our user uses our app. And this is exactly the point. So you might be wondering, never heard of it, never heard of progressive rendering. Is it new or like something fancy which invented recently? Actually, no. If we go back in the history, in 1997, HTTP 1.1 was introduced as RFC, and the most important part in this for us is chunk encoding. And basically what it says that instead of serving the whole page, the whole buffer to a server, you can split it in several buffers and serve it specifying length for each of them. And this is kind of a concept of streaming. If you are familiar with React.js, observable, or Node.js streams, it's exactly the thing with serving page in chunks. And the first mentioning of progressive rendering I managed to find on the internet is this blog post by Jeff Atwood that's called The Lost Art of Progressive HTML Rendering. And it has two very interesting points. The first one is, one thing I dislike about ASP.NET is that it renders the entire web page in memory before sending one single byte of the page to the browser. I totally agree with it. And the second one is, what's even more galling is that HTML was originally designed to render progressively as content is received. What it means? It means that even first versions of the first browser in the world, Netscape, they had support for progressive rendering even in first early beta releases. That means that browser goes through iterations rendering the HTML in browser. That means if you have like partially piece of HTML that come to you from the server, you can start parsing, recognize resources like scripts, images, styles, and start loading them. And in this case, it works more efficient because browser goes for resources in parallel, while your whole page is not ready yet. So if we added the previous code I showed you before, which looks like this, which just ends HTTP response with a rendered template, we can go further and using a little bit more logic and maybe more complex approach, we can reach progressive rendering without any additional tool. We just need to go for data, just split our data in small pieces and go for it in steps. Like if we need data for a header, we go for just data for the header and then render this template for the header and then serve the header. And this is perfectly done by write function in response in HTTP response stream, as you can see here. And then we go for another block, and do the same operation for every block on the page. Yeah, I totally agree that this code looks really difficult. And more difficult even to split your page in such pieces and then serve it. But at the end, we can use wonderful Node.js streams. And the previous code would look like this. So it's just we create our own stream with the parameters we got from the URL, and then just pipe the stream through the HTTP response stream. And that's it. But you might be wondering, my readable stream, how to implement that? For those who is not familiar with Node.js Streams API, it's quite simple as that. You just extend some built-in class in Node. You just implement read function, which allows you to push chunks of data through the stream. And that's, of course, asynchronous, and you can push whenever you want. And then when you stop pushing and the whole page is served, you just push null as a data. This is how readable streams work in Node.js without any additional libraries, just built in. So, why progressive rendering is better? So the first thing I already mentioned is less time to first byte. For some projects, it's really an important metrics used by teams, by performance engineers, and other stuff in the company. And also, it's very important for our user experience, because users should see our app as soon as possible, even though it's not completely ready, maybe, but we need to show something that we work for our user. The second thing is browser works more efficiently loading resources in parallel, and I'll show you a screenshot in a second how that works. It aligns with architecture based on microservices very well. Because of the main idea to split your data in small pieces and serve them in blocks of your page, it's perfectly fine to have a set of microservices which you can use separately. And every microservice just serves data of its scope, not going like using other microservices. You can use them directly to build a page. And even though your API, RESTful API or database is very, very slow, a user is thinking that your app in general is really fast. It's just psychology. This is how it works, how the perception of performance works. And this approach is more scalable than buffering the whole page. Why is that? Because if you add a new block on your page, it's like at the bottom with some data, if you have a buffering approach, your app would be rendering slower. But if you have progressive rendering, time to first byte would be the same. Even though you add something on the bottom or maybe on the right of your page, the first part of the page would be delivered at the same time, which is very important. And this is the picture I promised to show. This is a screenshot of a real project built using progressive rendering. And For some reasons, the API of this project doesn't serve data very fast. And you can see that the whole process of rendering takes about 3.5 seconds. But the first byte, the first part of the page, was delivered in 327 milliseconds, which is pretty good. Like, our users didn't even notice that this app is very slow. And which is more important, you can see that in parallel, browsers started downloading other stuff like images, scripts, styles, and every browser has this limitation how many HTTP requests it can do at the same time. And in this case, you can see that it's about 4 HTTP requests in this tab of a browser. Therefore, like, it loads resources, like all these 3 resources in parallel, then goes for another 3 resources, and exactly. So, but however, as all things in real world, it's not perfect, and it has problems that can stop you from using it. This is how HTTP protocol works. Before, we have to specify HTTP status code and all HTTP headers we need to set before sending the first byte. Otherwise, Node.js API just would ignore all things you set after, and even does not throw an error or something. You just don't set a cookie, but you wouldn't even notice that. And you should keep in mind that. So that means that cookies, redirects, not found statuses, and stuff like that, you need to serve before sending the first part of the page. And that means that you have to request the main entity of your page first. Like if you have online shop or something like that, you need to request the item of the shop on the marketplace first and decide if the page status is 4 of 4 not found, or maybe you need to set some cookie. But you would do it anyway, because you need meta tags and other things in header, which include this item description and other stuff. So in practice, it's not a huge deal. And user is not able to interact with the page till it's fully loaded. I'm not saying like the full interaction, but if you have JavaScript event handlers or something related to JavaScript, you would probably need to wait for a DOM-ready event and only then subscribe on events and other things related to JavaScript logic. And that means that your user would be able to click links and to open those links on the page and maybe submit forms. All native HTML experience works till the whole page is loading and is not ready yet. But if you have some JavaScript that attaches to an HTML and does something, it does it after DOM-ready event. And I've found some libraries that are still under development, but they make it possible to have this attachment to events even before the DOM event, DOM-ready event, I mean. But it's still up to you to decide to use them or not. And maybe for someone it would be a disadvantage as well, but you have to split your page data into small pieces or microservices. And I noticed that not everyone wants that and not everyone likes that. But to have progressive rendering, you need to split your huge data requests you have in small pieces, which would serve the page piece like step by step, chunk by chunk. And what about client-side rendering? You might be wondering why I'm saying all the things about server-side rendering and saying nothing about client-side. That's because actually it's very simple and it's already used by many people in single-page applications, like using React library or stuff like that. And it's simple as just split your data into small queries render as soon as you've got this data, and try to make your interface not jumpy using placeholders, because it's constantly moving while loading, and you need to reserve the place for the content, like, for instance, Facebook does. Facebook actually uses progressive rendering at client-side, and you can see these like placeholders in your feed on the right instead of like friend suggestion or whatever is there. And before all data was loaded, you can see those placeholders on the screen. And another question you might be wondering is, like, is there a library or framework which makes it possible? We don't want to read like a lot of docs and write this stream I showed before. And of course, there are a lot of ready solutions for that. So I've seen that some enthusiast makes work on the React DOM stream, which is the library that makes it possible to render virtual DOM on server like a stream in chunks. But I'm not sure about this. Is the library stable, or is there any problem with that? I would recommend to check it out on your own and see if it works. Also, if you know, like, Zalando fashion online shop, they use a project called Tailor, and what it basically does, it just gathers HTML pieces from a set of microservices. Every team develops like a piece of HTML on the page, and then Tailor just gathers everything in one piece and serves a page. Also, there is a quite old template engine, which is Node.js, and it's forked by LinkedIn. And what they do is you can specify a function as a property of data object when you render your template. And when template renders like this function, it allows you to go asynchronous and like request any data, and the stream would be paused till the moment you got this data and return as a callback. Also, there is a template engine called Marco or Marco Widgets. It does pretty similar thing. It works as progressive rendering everywhere on client side and on server. Also, there's pretty new template engine called Talisman. I've just read about this a month ago on Medium, and it looks really promising. And also, if you need not just a template engine, but the whole framework for building your app based on this approach on progressive rendering, you might want to use Cadbury.js, which is an isomorphic framework based on web components ideology using progressive rendering. Let's summarize the talk. If you have many data requests or a huge request you should split in small pieces, it means you need progressive rendering. Otherwise, it would be not that good user experience. The technology is basically very old and perfectly supported by browsers since the Netscape 1.0. Therefore, everyone can use that. It's not that hard to implement, and you can use Node.js streams for that. And even if you don't want to do that, there are a lot of ready solutions. But you have to keep in mind some disadvantages of that, like setting HTTP status code or HTTP headers, cookies, redirects, anything like that. You have to do that before the first chunk of data is searched from the server. There are some existing solutions. I would really recommend them to check them out and to experiment with them. Maybe it's a good use case, even not even, but especially for your project and your company. Might be it would be better user experience for your users, your customers. But the point of the talk is, don't make your users wait. Just make your apps render sooner and let them look like this. Thank you so much.